You planned a normal week. Commute, coffee inbox, repeat. Your boss hints a promotion could be yours next quarter, therefore you breathe easier and settle into the warm gravity of the predictable. But then something lands on your shoulders that you didn't schedule, an idea you can't shake, a phone call, a sentence from a sermon that won't stop humming. It is not loud, it is weight. You try to shrug it off, but it follows you into the shower, into spreadsheets, into sleep. Frame break. What if the interruption is the invitation? Roll the camera to Abel Mahola. Dust hangs in afternoon light. A young farmer named Elisha leans his weight into a wooden plow. 12 yoke of oxen grunt the field into straight lines. Therefore, you know this is a family with means a future that looks like more of the same. But a figure approaches, cloak rough like goat hair eyes that carry thunderstorms and silences. Elijah doesn't make a speech. He simply throws his mantle across the farmer's shoulders and keeps walking. The fabric's scratch says more than words. You're being drafted into a different story. Elisha runs after him, therefore we feel the pulse of decision. He wants to honor his parents first, to mark the moment with goodbye. Elijah basically says, in paraphrase, do what you must. Remember who just called you. Therefore, the decision returns to the farmer's chest. This is the part most of us stall on. We feel the pull, but we keep the old life idling in the driveway just in case. Elisha refuses the half measure. He slaughters the oxen, breaks the plow for firewood, cooks the meat, and feeds the whole village. The very tools that once pulled his future are now fuel for a farewell feast. But this isn't recklessness, it's clarity. He burns the bridge he's too tempted to recross. There's laughter, smoke, neighbors talking in circles. He's leaving. For what salary, what benefits? The answers don't fit a spreadsheet. Elisha serves the last plate, wipes his hands, and sets out after the prophet as an apprentice, a learner, a servant. Therefore, the first miracle is not flashy. It's internal courage to close one door before the next opens. Calling is often less skywriting and more next faithful step repeated. Frame break. Which plow in your life needs to become firewood? Let's talk about cost. Following Elijah meant obscurity before visibility, errands before authority, learning how to be interrupted and not resent it. But hidden years aren't wasted years. The field had taught Elisha rhythm, grit, and stewardship. Now those muscles would carry mercy into rooms he hadn't imagined. Most of us want the mantle without the monotony, the highlight reel without the clipboard seasons. Therefore, when monotony arrives, we mislabel it as failure. What if it's rehearsal? Modern mirror. Maybe your oxen are recurring payments and a lease you signed to prove you're stable. Maybe your plow is a role that once fit but now rubs. I'm not telling you to ghost responsibilities. I'm saying count the cost and decide on purpose. Elisha's feast wasn't a tantrum. It was testimony. He turned tools into table work, into worship, goodbye, into generosity. Therefore, when he walked away, he wasn't fleeing, he was following. Here's the quiet genius of this opening scene. Fern Kings, Chariots, 1919. Paraphrased for fair use, God interrupts a competent person in the middle of their competence. Not a dropout, not a drifter, a man who knows how to finish a row. The kingdom often recruits from the faithful, not the flashy. But the invitation still slices. It says, will you trade control for calling? Will you risk the version of yourself people already applaud to become the person God is shaping? Even if applause goes silent for a while, you don't need a cloak to feel it. It might be the nudge to forgive first, to apply to a role that scares you, to have a hard conversation you've rehearsed 12 times and always postpone. Therefore, decide in daylight what you won't second-guess in the dark. Burn the backup plan that keeps you half obedient. Host one small feast, a generous act that marks the pivot. Then take the next faithful step. The field will be there tomorrow, the mantle might not. And takeaway. Burn the plows that keep you half obedient and turn your farewell into generosity so you can follow with both hands free. It's your first morning after the boss retires. Their name still sits on the door, but everyone's eyes drift to you. The building feels louder, the air thinner. You have the laptop, therefore you have the problems. You want to phone a friend, but the friend is gone. Frame break. How do you step forward when the person you leaned on just lifted off? Zoom out to the ridge roads of Israel. Elijah has walked Elisha from town to town. Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho. As if the older prophet is untying knots one by one, prophets whisper. It ends today, and Elisha keeps answering, in essence, I know. Please hush. This isn't denial, it's reverent grief. At the Jordan, Elijah rolls up his mantle and strikes. Water peels back, therefore an old path opens for a final walk. Then fire and wind, the chariot moment. Elijah is gone, and all Elisha can see is empty sky and a fallen mantle. The absence is loud. The cloth is heavier than before, as if inheritance has weight. Elisha cries out and tears his old cloak, therefore he makes room to wear the one that just fell. He asked for a double portion, not twice the fireworks, but the firstborn's share. The responsibility to carry the family work forward, but the river that parted for Elijah has closed again for him. This is the test. You have the title, therefore you face the same obstacle without the mentor beside you. He picks up the mantle, stands where the water says no, and asks, where is the God who was with my teacher? Then he strikes. The Jordan opens not because cloth is magic, but because the presence is faithful. Private grief has become public courage. Prophets watching from the opposite bank see the water split and finally exhale. They recognize the same spirit at work and bow their heads. That recognition matters, but notice the sequence: resolve first, validation second. Elisha didn't wait for a committee to confirm a calling. He acted on the last instruction given and the God he had come to know in quiet places. Therefore, leadership arrives not as a spotlight, but as a long obedience that keeps walking when applause is still on mute. Frame break. Are you delaying obedience until you have unanimous votes? Let's sit with double portion. In that culture, it meant heirship, the weight of continuing the household's mission, caring for dependents, stewarding resources. It wasn't more fireworks. It was deeper roots. Many of us pray for platform, but our lives ache for presence. The Jordan parts not for those who crave spectacle, but for those who shoulder service. Elisha wears a mantle and immediately heads into ordinary needs: water in a city, debt in a kitchen, grief in a bedroom. The power is real, therefore its first assignment is small rooms. Your Jordan might be a doorway you keep circling, the office of a difficult conversation, the spreadsheet that tells the truth, the rehab intake you don't want to admit you need. You hold a mantle too: skills, relationships, experiences, scars that now function like authority. But rivers don't respect resumes. They respond to reliance. Step to the edge with what you've been handed and the God who handed it to you. Strike not out of swagger, but out of trust. And when the waters move, don't build a brand. Cross and get to work. Takeaway. Ask for presence, not platform. Then use what's already in your hand to face the river in front of you. You've seen it at work. The lobby looks like a tech magazine, therefore everyone smiles for the tour, but the hallway conversations taste metallic. Projects die quietly. People leave without goodbyes. HR sends a mural and a muffin cart, but the metrics keep bleeding. Frame break. What if the problem isn't the posters, it's the spring? Jericho brings Elisha a similar paradox. 2 Kings 2:19-22. Paraphrased. The city's pleasant, they say, therefore people move here. But the water is bad and it keeps the future from growing. Elisha asks for a new phone bowl with salt. It's an odd request until you remember signs matter: new vessel, clean intent. He walks to the source, not downstream where symptoms splash, and casts salt into the spring. He doesn't chant. He names the healer. The Lord has made this water healthy. Therefore life can flourish again. From that day the water holds. A city's tomorrow changes because someone treated the root, not the rumor. Notice the pattern. God's power moves toward ordinary civic needs, plumbing, not palaces. The prophet doesn't build a stage, he fixes a fountain. That is mercy's style. But the very next scene snaps us into a different kind of source problem. 2 Kings chapter 2 to 23 to 25 paraphrased. On the road toward Bethel, an old hotspot for counterfeit worship, a gang of youths comes out loud with contempt. They ridicule Elisha and the office he bears, mocking the ascent of Elijah with taunts like, "Go up," as if to say, "Disappear," like your mentor. The issue isn't bald jokes. It's a culture sneering at holiness, a spring of scorn feeding a town. Elisha doesn't trade insult for insult. He places the matter before God. Therefore, there's a sudden severe answer too. She bears charge and 42 of the offenders are mauled. The text doesn't linger. It doesn't gloat. It simply records consequence. Before we rush to hot takes, slow down. These are not toddlers. The Hebrew allows a range of adolescent young men, street strong, not stroller pushed. And this is Bethel, where sneering at the prophetic voice wasn't comedy. It was policy. But still the scene stuns us, and it should. Mercy heals a spring, therefore life returns. Contempt poisons a spring, therefore harm spreads. In Elisha's first circuit, God is teaching a country what you do at the source reverberates through the street. Modern mirror. Our timelines monetize mockery. Sarcasm becomes a sport, and sacred things, promises grief, vows get kicked for content. We think it's harmless because it's common. But contempt always charges interest. It shrinks your capacity to trust, to repent, to change. Families learn it. Offices breathe it. Churches export it. Eventually, the bears are not claws in the brush, but consequences on the calendar. Friendships mauled by irony, futures thinned by cynicism. A generation allergic to awe. Frame break. What streams are your words feeding? Back to Jericho's spring. Elisha's tool is simple salt in a new bowl. It's not chemistry, it's covenant theater. Salt says preserved and pure, a small sacrament at the source. You and I have versions, a clean spreadsheet and a frank meeting, therapy intake and an honest prayer, apology with no footnotes. We do something concrete at the spring so downstream can change and bow. Therefore, the kitchen gets safe again, the staff meeting exhales, the neighborhood starts to imagine tomorrow. Also back to Bethel's road. Reverence is not fragility, it's clarity about what holds the world together. Treating holy things as heavy marriage vows, human dignity. The prophetic word doesn't make us brittle, it makes us careful. The Bears episode is not a license for vengeance, it is a warning about the ecosystem of scorn. When leaders perform spirituality while hating holiness, communities learn to laugh at what should make them quiet. But a different ecosystem is possible: honor, confession, listening, repair. Where do you start this week? Find one spring and walk to it. Is the office tense? Identify the real blockage: unclear goals, hidden metrics, a bully shielded by results. Is your household brittle? Trace the brittleness to exhaustion, unsaid apologies, or screens swallowing dinner. Bring a new bowl, a fresh practice you can actually hold in your hands. Add salt, truth plus grace. Name aloud the healer, even if your prayer is clumsy. Therefore, watch small health return, not because you managed optics, but because you met God at the source. Takeaway. Change the spring, honor the sacred, because what you seed at the source becomes the story downstream. Picture a kitchen at 11:38 p.m. Past due notices fan across the table like red flags at a parade you never wanted. A single parent opens the banking app, therefore the throat tightens. Groceries, rent, braces, gas numbers march without mercy. A number flashes from an unknown caller. You let it die in voicemail. Frame break. When lack knocks with a clipboard, what does faith do next? Ancient scene, same pressure, 2. Kings 4:1-7 paraphrased for fair use. A widow of a prophet is drowning in debt. A creditor is coming to seize her 2 sons as bondservants, legal in that economy, devastating in any. She cries out to Elisha. He doesn't hand her a speech, he asks a question. What do you have in the house? A small flask of oil. Therefore he answers with instruction that sounds like a riddle. Go to your neighbors. Borrow empty vessels. Not a few. Go inside, shut the door behind you and your boys, and pour. As each jar is full, set it aside. The plan is both humbling and empowering. Ask for help, then work in private. She borrows. This is faith with blisters. She closes the door. But not to shut out God, to shut out spectacle and shame. Then the quiet labor begins. Tip the small flask, watch. A thin stream become a lifeline. One jar fills, then another, therefore the room becomes choreography. Sons. Slide new emptiness into her hands. She tips again. The oil keeps coming, but only until the last jar is full. Bring me another. There isn't another. Then the flow stops, as if provision honors the limit of prepared capacity. She reports back to Elisha. Sell the oil, he says, pay your debt and live on the rest. Dignity preserved, future sustained. Let's notice the mercy logic. God could have dropped bags of silver at her door. Instead, he multiplies what she already has. Therefore, she remains a participant, not a prop. The miracle includes neighbors who lend and sons who learn. But it excludes gawkers. Closed-door miracles protect the vulnerable from becoming content. Also notice the math. Faith shows up as borrowed emptiness. If the oil tracks the jars, the question becomes piercing. If your miracle depended on the space you made, how many containers would you gather? Modern mirror. Many households carry quiet debt, student loans with compounding side-eye medical bills that feel like a second diagnosis, credit cards dressed like friends. We pray for more, but must leave our lives cluttered with unconfessed spending, unmade budgets, unasked help. What does gathering jars look like now? It can be appointments, credit counseling, a budgeting class, a second interview for a side gig. It can be tools, a spreadsheet. You actually open envelopes that keep you honest, an auto-transfer that moves before your willpower wakes. It can be people texting your community group. I need 3 used baby tubs and 4 mason jars, translation skills, time blocks, accountability, and shutting the door. That's your boundary with comparison and panic. You pour behind a closed door when you mute lifestyle noise, log off sales that preach scarcity, and refuse to stage your rescue for likes. You and your people work the plan, pour your skill into paying work you can do this week. Sell the oil invoice, deliver, collect, pay the debt first, no victory lap on credit, live on the rest, build margin. Therefore, dignity re-enters the room not as swagger, but as stewardship. One more angle, the oil stops when the jars stop. That isn't punishment, it's pedagogy. Provision meets prepared capacity, so you won't drown in success you can't steward. Tomorrow, gather more jars, education systems, habits, so tomorrow's poor can meet them. And please see the tenderness here. God meets a woman at midnight with a plan that uses what's already in her pantry. The kingdom is not allergic to small. It multiplies small into enough. Frame break, which is your next faithful step. Borrowing capacity, shutting a door, or pouring what you already have. You don't need celebrity to start. You need a clean counter and a yes takeaway. Gather real capacity, close the door to shame, and pour what you already have. Then sell the oil, pay the debt, and live on the rest. You've got a spare room that isn't spare boxes, treadmill, last year's Christmas bins. A text pops up. Hey, we'll be in town. Could we crash for a night? You love these people. Therefore, you look at the clutter and feel your pulse climb. Hosting costs something. Time, groceries, sleep, privacy. Frame break. What if making literal space is how God makes inner space? And what if promise often checks in through the guest entrance? Shunem late light on whitewashed walls. A capable woman notices a prophet who regularly passes by her street. She doesn't gush, she discerns. He's a man of God, she tells her husband, therefore her hospitality becomes intentional, not performative. They add a small upper room, simple things for a traveler to rest and work. She isn't angling for favors, she isn't networking. She's building a quiet runway for someone else's calling to land. The prophet rests, breath slows, and the cadence of mercy keeps moving through town. Because a household chose to share a roof, Elisha wants to honor the kindness. Can we put in a good word with the palace? No, she says, paraphrasing. I'm at home among my own. She isn't trying to climb, she's trying to bless. Therefore, the conversation turns tender, what ache sits behind her strength. Gehazi, Elisha's aide, observes what's unspoken. No, child, time has passed. Hope has learned to dress as contentment. Elisha speaks a promise with a timeline. The words pull on a scar. Please don't play with my heart, she essentially says. Long disappointment trains self-protection. But promise doesn't mock, it mends. In time, a child laughs in the room they built for someone else. Pause and notice this kingdom geometry: a bed, a chair, a lamp, ordinary objects. Therefore, rest, study, and light for another person's assignment. God turns that outward margin into inward miracle. Hospitality here is more than place settings. It is prophetic participation. She aligned her square of real estate with God's purposes, and in the aligning she became aligned with a promise she didn't dare request. Frame break. Where could your calendar, your budget, or your square footage become a runway for someone else's calling? Modern mirror. Hospitality can look like cooking big and inviting small, like funding a college kid's bus ticket, like setting aside a weekly hour to mentor, like leaving a clean, quiet corner for prayer or study. It can also be attention. The most crowded room is a phone screen. The most generous gift is undistracted eyes. We think faith is mainly about asking. But Elisha's friend shows another door, creating margin without manipulation. Don't post about it. Don't invoice God. Just build the room and let love live there. Let's get practical. Building a room might mean literal construction. More often it means decisions that rearrange walls inside you. Clear your schedule's attic, say no so you can say yes with depth. Choose a budget line named guest. Stock a few staples, shelf-stable meals, extra toothbrushes, a spare charger. Prepare a quiet corner for reflection, lamp, table, chair, and guard it like a hospital ward for your soul. Therefore, when God brings someone weary to your street, you're not scrambling, you're ready. And when God brings a promise to your own house later, you have a resting place for it too. Here's the tender surprise: the room you build for God's work often becomes the nursery for God's promise. Not because you earned it, grace doesn't transact, but because generosity trains your life to receive. The woman of Shunem will face grief later and will go there. But for now, hold this. She didn't bargain, she prepared. She didn't audition for a miracle, she made a habit, and habits become highways for heaven to drive on. Frame break. What small room can you build this week on your roof, on your calendar, in your heart? Takeaway. Make margin on purpose, create a small, consistent space where others can rest and God's promise can land without fanfare. It's the call you never want, a number you know, a voice you love, a sentence that unthreads your bones. Something's wrong, come now. You drive without remembering red lights, ER doors bloom open, the beeps don't care who you are. A doctor says words that rattle like coins in a metal tray, uncertain weight. We're trying. You sit. You pray in syllables, not sentences. Frame break. When the future you were promised goes silent, what does faith do with the silence? Dust white afternoon in Shunem 2, Kings 18 to 37, paraphrased. The promised son runs to his father in the field. Complains of a sudden pain, is carried to his mother, and at noon he dies in her arms. She does not plan a funeral. She climbs the stairs to the prophet's room, lays him on that guest bed built for mercy, and shuts the door. Therefore grief becomes focus. She saddles a donkey and rides hard for Carmel. Her husband asks questions she doesn't have energy to answer. Her mouth finds one sentence of stubborn hope. It will be well. At the mountain she reaches Elisha, clutches his feet. Gehazi, the assistant, moves to protect decorum, but Elisha stops him. There's a sorrow God has kept hidden that is now breaking open. She doesn't ask for platitudes. She asks the only question that matters. Did I beg for this? Did I ask you to raise my hopes to bury them? Elisha sends Gehazi ahead with his staff, and simple instructions go. Don't greet anyone, lay the staff on the child's face. Therefore, an urgent ritual runs ahead without the prophet's presence. But the staff does not wake the boy. Technique without presence proves thin. The mother refuses to go home without Elisha. As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you, is the heartbeat under her words. Therefore he rises and follows her back to the room where hope lies still. He goes in alone and shuts the door. He prays. Then he stretches himself out, eyes to eyes, mouth to mouth, hands to hands, placing warmth where cold has settled. It is stubborn, embodied prayer. He gets close enough for breath to be shared. The flesh warms, but the boy is not fully awake. Elisha walks, prays, returns, and stretches himself out again. 7 small sneezes later, life. The child opens his eyes. The room on the roof becomes the delivery room of a second birth. Sit with the pattern. First, proximity. Elisha won't pretend that distance works. Some resurrections require you to be where the grief actually is. Second, perseverance. He prays, stretches, walks, returns, repeats. Therefore, the miracle is not a one-click fix. It is a wrestle that refuses to let go. Third, partnership. The mother's grit summons the prophet's presence. The prophet's presence invites God's power. God's power restores what despair had already written off. But do not skip the shut door. This is not spectacle. This is intimacy, holy work, guarded from onlookers who would reduce it to gossip. Modern mirror. When a marriage stops breathing, we often fling staff-shaped solutions. A forwarded article, a single counseling session, a guilt-laced text. When depression lies in the guest room, we lob verses like darts and call it care. But techniques without presence ring hollow. Better go to the room, shut the door, pray the name of Jesus under your breath while you do dishes and sit in waiting rooms. Stretch your life out, eye to eye, I see you. Hand to hand, I will hold you. Mouth to mouth, I will speak life even when the air tastes like metal. If the first try warms but doesn't wake, walk. Pray, return, repeat. Frame break. Where have you accepted no pulse because the first method didn't work? What would it look like to keep showing up without turning your loved one into a project? Also hear this. Resurrection is God's work, not ours. Elisha's posture is dependence, not performance. We are invited to persistence, not control. We keep knocking because love is faithful, not because we can force outcomes. The mother's line. It will be well isn't denial. It's defiance against despair's inevitability. A final tenderness. When the boy sneezes and opens his eyes, Elisha calls the mother and returns her son to her arms. No press release, no brand building, just a reunion in a small room. Therefore, the story of great miracles remains a story of small rooms. Kitchens, spare bedrooms, hospital corners where God meets grit with grace. If your promise feels cold, make the room ready again. Ask for presence. Invite partnership. Persevere without performative panic. And when warmth returns, receive your future back like a gift you'll never take for granted. Takeaway. When techniques stall, bring presence and perseverance, shut the door, pray, and keep showing up until warmth returns to what God promised. You know the scene, a church potluck or office party, long tables, foil pans, breathing steam. The volunteer crew is running on caffeine and goodwill. Someone misreads a label, allergies flare. The room lurches from laughter to worry, one tiny ingredient. Therefore, a whole evening turns frame break. What do you do when a small mistake poisons a big pot? Famine grips the land. 2 Kings 4:38-44, paraphrased. Food is math, and math is cruel. Elisha returns to a guild house where apprentices huddle around a low fire. Put on the large pot, he says. Therefore, even in scarcity, they choose to feed. A young man goes foraging and grabs wild gourds, green, plentiful, unknown. He shreds them into the stew. But what looks like more turns out to be dangerous. First spoonfuls lift faces, change bowls, pause midair. Death in the pot is the verdict that ricochets around the room, and hunger folds into fear. Elisha doesn't panic or shame the forager. He asks for flour, ordinary flour. No chant, no drama, just a handful tossed into a poisoned pot. He tells them to serve it. Therefore, the same bowls that were danger become dinner. Mercy meets mistake without a lecture. The text is quiet about the chemistry because the point isn't a recipe, it's a rhythm. When scarcity tempts us to grab whatever is nearby, ideologies, shortcuts, bitterness. Leaders don't make speeches over the ruined stew. They add redemptive substance and keep feeding people. Modern mirror. You've seen pots poisoned, a Slack channel where sarcasm becomes the house spice. A family group thread where one person's unresolved pain flavors every conversation. A church team that imports a leadership hack that looks savvy and tastes toxic. We usually answer with heat, argue harder, tighten rules, exile the forager. But Elisha models a different move: add flour. In our kitchens, that looks like truth and grace in simple concrete forms. Clear norms, confessions without spin, a story of God's faithfulness placed gently in the simmer. The point is not to pretend the poison never happened. It's to make the pot safe again so people can eat and live. The camera stays in the kitchen for Act 2. A man arrives from Baal Shalisha carrying a first fruits gift, barley loaves and fresh grain. It's not much. 20 small loaves for 100 hungry students is a math problem that laughs. Elisha says, "Give it to the people to eat." The servant does the math out loud, Therefore, the instruction sounds unreasonable. But they pass the bread anyway, pieces into palms, palms into mouths, and hunger begins to loosen its grip. There's enough. There's even leftovers, which is the gospel's favorite word in a famine. Link the scenes. In the first, something harmful is neutralized and the table restored. In the second, something humble is multiplied and the table expanded. Together they teach a kitchen liturgy: remove danger, then share provision. Don't stop at not poisoned. Press on to well-fed. A lot of us reach not toxic in our homes and teams and think the job is done. But the kingdom aims for abundant, safe tables that actually satisfy. Let's get practical. Where is your pot? If it's your team, what wild gourds keep landing in the stew? Vague goals, cynical jokes, constant hurry. Your flour might be a weekly rhythms reset. A clear definition of done, a norm that complements travel with apology when you're late. If it's your household, maybe the stew has screens and stress and 2 people filling silence with scrolling. Your flour might be tech-free dinners, a real bedtime, or starting with gratitude so conversation can breathe. If it's your soul, perhaps the poison is comparison or a secret you're tired of feeding. Your flower might be confession to a trusted friend, a therapist appointment, or a psalm read aloud until it tastes like bread instead of ink. Frame break: who brings the loaves? Don't underestimate the person who shows up with a small, faithful gift. Don't despise your own handful either. In a famine world, God seems to love multiplying what people are brave enough to surrender. You don't need to feed a city today. You need to feed the 12 people within reach and trust God with the 100. When the bowls circle back with leftovers, remember abundance arrive through ordinary hands that obeyed in the face of math. Mercy's style hasn't changed. It doesn't cancel the cook who misjudged the gourds. It doesn't hoard the gift from the man who walked his loaves across dry fields. It dignifies both the one who failed and the one who brought a small yes by keeping the table open. The crisis kitchen becomes a classroom where God teaches us to meet harm with healing and need with enough. And the room that once echoed with death in the pot becomes a room that hums with there was some left. Takeaway: when a pot is poisoned, add redemptive substance. When provision looks small, pass it anyway. God loves turning safe tables into satisfying ones. You finally land an appointment with the specialist. The waiting room hums with forms and daytime TV. You expect a complex protocol machine's rare meds. Therefore, you brace for drama. The doctor scans your chart and says something almost insulting in its simplicity. Do these 3 small things every day for 6 weeks. You nod, but inside you flinch. Small feels beneath the weight of your pain. Frame break: why do we distrust ordinary instructions when we're desperate for extraordinary help? Enter Naaman, 2 Kings 5, 1-14 paraphrased. He's a commander decorated and decisive. Victories trail him like a cloak. But under the armor is a private ruin, a skin disease that won't leave. A captive Israelite girl serving quietly in his home becomes the unlikely hinge. There's a prophet in Samaria who could help, she says to Naaman's wife. Therefore the general mobilizes like a general letters from king's silver and gold, a procession that can be heard before it's seen. The king of Israel panics at the request. Elisha hears, steadies the room, and says, "Send him to me." So he'll know there's a prophet in Israel. The convoy parks outside a modest house. Naaman's image expects ceremony, hand-waving, incantation, a performance to match his rank. But Elisha doesn't even come to the door. He sends a message: go wash in the Jordan 7 times and you'll be clean. No drum roll, no VIP prayer line, just a muddy river and a number. Pride detonates. Aren't the rivers of Damascus better? Naaman fumes. He wanted a prophet to do something spectacular to him. He did not want to do something humbling with God. Therefore, he turns away angry, nearly healed and still sick. His servants bless the brave truth-tellers, step close and talk him down. If the prophet had demanded something heroic, you would have done it. How much more when it's simple? Therefore, the dilemma clarifies. Do you want to be dignified or do you want to be healed? Naaman rides the argument down to the water's edge. The Jordan is not impressive. It is obedient. He steps in. 1 dip, the skin still ruined. 2, 3, no change. 4, the part of the soul that mocks obedience gets loud. 5, 6, this is where many of us stop. But he goes under a 7th time, the number of completion in a story that keeps using small things to do heavy lifting. He surfaces and the disease no longer tells his story. He returns to Elisha with skin that doesn't sting, and a heart that knows the difference between river and God. Gratitude loosens his grip on status. He offers gifts. Elisha refuses them to keep grace from looking like a receipt. Naaman asks for soil to remember where he met mercy. He pledges his worship to the God who healed what rank could not. The miracle's mechanics were not complicated. The miracle's insult was, do the ordinary thing you're avoiding again and again until pride loses its voice. Modern mirror. We want impressive interventions, a viral plan to fix a marriage, a mastermind course to cure our finances, a revelation that bypasses therapy. Therefore, we scroll past the prescription that works apology without defense. Weekly counseling, a budget with boring envelopes, physical therapy that feels like kindergarten movement. We want a prophet to wave a hand. God often points to water. The instruction is not punishment, it is formation. Every dip loosens the ego that swore healing had to match our brand. Frame break. What is your Jordan this week? Phone the counselor, take the meds as directed. Confess the half-truth, repeat the rehab exercise. Also, who is your servant, the overlooked voice God keeps using to steer you? Listen to them. Pride is expensive and repetitive. Humility is cheaper and gets results. And remember, the arithmetic of obedience, numbers matter, because daily faithfulness is how God trains us to receive what we can't manufacture. If the first 6 days look like nothing, day 7 isn't magic, it's momentum meeting mercy. One more note for leaders. Naaman arrived with heavy gifts and heavier expectations. Elisha guarded the miracle from becoming a marketplace. When grace becomes a brand, people start buying instead of obeying. Keep your ministry uncluttered. Keep your rhythm simple. Send people to the river more than to your platform. Therefore, when healing arrives, attention goes where it should, the God who meets us in ordinary water. Takeaway. Trade image for obedience. Do the simple, repeatable thing God is asking even when it feels beneath you, and let humility open what pride keeps shut. You're the right hand, the one who knows the calendar, the coffee order, the back entrance. When the boss turns down perks to stay clean, you feel the pinch because you're the one who carries the bag. People slip you envelopes for all you do. You didn't ask, therefore taking feels like harmless equity. Frame break. What story do you start telling yourself when you stand close to power but outside the spotlight? Naaman has just surfaced from the river with new skin and a softer heart. He brings heavy gifts to Elisha, but the prophet refuses, so no one confuses grace with a receipt. 2 Kings 5:15-19 paraphrased. Gehazi watches the treasure turn away down the road, silver clinking like missed opportunity. My master spared this foreigner, he mutters to himself. Therefore he decides to fix what mercy left unfinished. He runs after Naaman with a smile and a story. Some students just arrived. Could we have a little silver and 2 sets of clothes? Naaman's relief is generous. He doubles the ask. Gehazi tucks the bags out of sight, dusts off his hands, and walks back like nothing happened. Elisha looks up. Where did you go? It's a small question that makes big rooms feel suddenly airless. Gehazi says, nowhere, but the prophet speaks like a father who already knows. My spirit went with you in that conversation. Was this the moment to turn ministry into merchandise, to collect money and wardrobes and future real estate while a new believer is still catching his breath? He's not condemning wealth. He's confronting timing and motive. Gehazi wanted proximity to equal permission. He wanted grace to foot a luxury bill. Therefore, the sickness that left Naaman now marks Gehazi. Entitlement writes a rash on the skin. Sit in the subtlety. Gehazi didn't steal a widowed pantry. He took from a grateful general who wouldn't miss it. He even framed it as charity for students. But motives matter. Elisha had refused the gift to keep the river moment pure, no suspicion, no strings, no invoice stapled to mercy. When assistants monetize what leaders consecrate, the mission gets priced by the pound. The trap of proximity is thinking access equals ownership, that I was there equals I deserve this, that my unseen labor justifies a private cut. The trap speaks fluent rationalization. It's only fair. Modern mirror. If you're near influence, church staff, nonprofit, startup, family business, your heart will eventually walk past unguarded gold comp trips, gift cards with no ledger, discounts that feel like destiny. You'll be tempted to say, we're blessing each other, while really blessing yourself. Set policies now while your hands are clean. What gifts you accept, how you disclose them, where money sleeps at night. Leaders, protect your team from the fog. Refuse certain perks in public so your crew isn't left explaining in private. Therefore, integrity becomes a shared oxygen, not an individual heroics test. Notice another angle: Gehazi's speed. He ran after Naaman. Greed and hurry are cousins. When you're sprinting to secure what you deserve, pause. Ask, would I do this if the cameras were on? Could I narrate this to my future self without editing? Will this choice make it easier or harder to preach grace with a straight face? Frame break. What would change if you measured wins by clean hands, not full closets? There's a sad coda we'll revisit later. Gehazi shows up years down the road telling the king stories of Elisha's miracles, which means the door of witness is not slammed forever. But the scar remains. Consequences are real even when grace is not absent. Closeness to God's work is not the same as likeness to God's heart. Proximity should make you humbler, not hungrier for perks. You can carry a prophet's staff and still miss the prophet's spirit. So choose now. If you manage budgets, make 2 people sign. If you handle gifts, log every one. If you receive a private thank you, redirect it toward the mission or split it with the invisible team members who do the unglamorous hours. And when your soul whispers, you've earned this answer, I am a steward, not an owner, then breathe the lighter air of a conscience that doesn't flinch when small questions land in big rooms. Takeaway. Proximity isn't permission. Guard your motives, keep money and mercy from mixing, and choose clean hands over quiet cuts. You borrow a friend's DSLR for a weekend shoot. First hour in, the strap slips, the lens kisses concrete, your stomach drops through the floor. It isn't just money. It's trust, therefore you imagine the conversation and wince. Or the office lends you a laptop. The drive dies the night before the pitch, small compared to the world's pain, but cheaty, big enough to keep you awake. Frame break. Does God care about these everyday losses, the ones that won't make headlines but will bruise a relationship or a budget? Cut to the Jordan's tree line. Jehu. 2 Kings chapter 6, 1-7 paraphrased. The prophet's school is growing, therefore they need more room. No miracle yet, just men hauling tools, chopping timber, sweating purpose into a bigger space. One swings, iron sings, and then silence. The axe head shears off, flashes in the sun, and knifes into the river. You can almost hear the gulp. He blurts the part that makes it worse. It was borrowed. Not mine, not insured, borrowed. Debt plus disappointment in one splash. Elisha doesn't roll his eyes. He asks a simple question that doubles as a spiritual practice. Where did it fall? The man points to the exact spot, no vague shrugging, no pretending it's somewhere over there. Therefore the prophet cuts a small stick and tosses it where iron disappeared. No spell, no drama. Wood hits water and what should sink surfaces. The iron floats like a confession rising to light. Reach out and take it, Elisha says. The worker stretches his hand and lifts back what anxiety already wrote off. Sit with the choreography. Lost named location pointed to a simple act, offered a reachable miracle given in a human hand. Participating. The story is tiny beside chariots of fire. But the God of chariots also cares about borrowed tools. Heaven isn't embarrassed to solve problems that live on receipts. In a world where debt could shackle a laborer's future, this is mercy defending dignity. The axe head matters because people matter and because integrity around small things trains a community for big things. Modern mirror. Your axe head might be a cracked rental car bumper, a busted borrowed stroller, a spreadsheet you deleted from a shared drive. The instinct is to hide, to blame supply chain, to hope it blows over. Better wait, trace where it fell, name the exact point the thing went wrong, timestamp action decision. Invite a wise voice, a manager, a mentor, a friend who prays more than they panic. Then throw a stick, do the next simple, honest thing that makes recovery possible. File the claim, call the owner. Own the mistake, set a payment plan, learn the skill you skipped. Therefore, watch shame lose buoyancy as integrity rises. Notice the order again. Where did it fall? Most of us answer with weather reports. It's been crazy, everyone's behind. God's question is surgical. Not what's wrong with the river, but show me the spot. In marriage, that's the conversation you keep avoiding. In finances, the subscription you won't cancel. In faith, the morning you stopped being honest with God. Point to it. Honesty clears the water. And the stick. It's humble, almost silly. Add wood to a river, why? In the kingdom's physics, simple obedience often does heavy lifting. The stick can be an apology without the word, but a boundary on your calendar, a budget line named restitution, a recurring reminder to back up your work. Throw it exactly where the loss went under. Don't miss the final verb, reach. The prophet doesn't fish it out for him. Mercy gets it to the surface. Stewardship takes it the last few inches. Partnership is the pattern of grace. Frame break. If you're replaying a borrowed loss in your mind, what is your sequence point? Throw reach. Don't dramatize it. Do it. Text the owner now. Hey, this happened. I'm sorry. Here's my plan to make it right. If you're the owner, mirror mercy. Set a fair plan. Remember the day your axe head sank and someone helped you breathe again. Tuck this in your pocket. God is not too grand for small rooms or small sinks. He keeps walking with crews who are building something good, and when a tiny failure threatens to unravel tomorrow, he helps recover what would have chained a conscience. The point isn't to avoid every splash. It's to learn a reflex, name the spot, throw the stick, reach your hand. Therefore, ordinary work can continue, and trust more expensive than iron stays intact. Takeaway. Trace the loss, do the next simple, honest thing, and reach for what grace brings back, because God cares about borrowed tools and the trust attached to them. You open Slack and your stomach flips. Threads you're not in, meetings you weren't invited to. A rival presentation hits the calendar at the same hour as yours. Therefore, you know what's coming, a polite ambush. Your pulse writes the day's script. Defend, fire back, hoard receipts. Frame break, what if courage isn't about louder speeches but clearer sight? Dawn over Dothan, 2 Kings 6:8-23. Paraphrased, a foreign king is furious because his ambushes keep failing. Therefore he sends horses, chariots, and a whole unit by night to seize one problem, Elisha. The town wakes to iron circling the hills like a clenched fist. Elisha's servant steps outside, sees the ring of spears, and panic seizes his throat. What will we do is the only prayer he has. Elisha answers with something scandalously calm. He doesn't calculate troop ratios. He asks for an eye miracle. Lord, open his eyes so he may see. Therefore the veil thins. Hills blaze with chariots of fire already there, already surrounding what surrounded them. Presence reframes problem. The army didn't shrink. Sight grew. Courage doesn't always change your circumstance, it changes your count. What if your office, your family, your inbox is encircled by presence first? Elisha then asks for a different miracle, not fire, not slaughter, clarity for friends, confusion for foes. The enemy is struck with blindness, not darkness so much as disorientation, therefore they can be led. Elisha walks out to the very men who came to take him and says in essence, "You're on the wrong road. Follow me and I'll lead you to the man you seek." He shepherds an army like a teacher takes a field trip straight into Samaria, the capital. The gates close. The king of Israel sees enemies in his courtyard and does what kings do. He asks permission to finish them. Elisha refuses. Would you slaughter those you caught with your own sword? Paraphrase. Set food before them. Water. A great feast. Therefore the courtyard of a frightened king becomes a dining room for confused soldiers. Weapons clatter to the floor. Bowls pass hand to hand. Fear drains with the wine. Then they are sent home. The raids stop for a time, not because Israel learned to swing harder, but because mercy disarmed the script. Modern mirror. Your version of Dothan might be a campaign to edge you out, a lawsuit, letterhead, a comment mob. The reflex is to fight in the same key match, threat with threat. But Elisha's rhythm is different. Pray for perception, walk in calm, and choose mercy where humiliation would be easy. That's not weakness, it's warfare of another kingdom. The servant's opened eyes didn't turn him into a spectator. They turned him into someone who can act without panic. And the blinded army wasn't crushed, it was corrected. Mercy didn't erase consequences, it redirected them toward peace. What does open my eyes look like on a Tuesday? Sometimes it's literal prayer before you hit send. Sometimes it's pulling back from the swirl to name the unseen. Helps already present friends who will tell you the truth. Mentors who have walked this road, scriptures that anchor your breath. A counselor's office on your calendar, a God who is not late. Therefore the count changes. You plus God's presence plus a handful of faithful allies outnumber whatever circles your hill. Panic shrinks, wisdom rises. And blind the enemy. We don't hex people. We ask God to confuse evil scripts, the gossip chain that feeds on half-truths, the predatory deal, the shame cycle in your head. Pray, Lord, scramble the signals that carry harm, expose them, reroute them, waste their momentum. Then be ready to lead disoriented harm into safe boundaries. HR with documentation, mediation with a neutral, a blocked number, a new calendar rule, a community that refuses to platform cruelty. Therefore you practice courage as stewardship, not as swagger. Finally, the feast. The king wanted spectacle. Elisha wanted witness. Feeding enemies isn't naivete. It's strategy when humiliation would only harden tomorrow's war. What would a mercy meal be in your world? Bringing donuts to a hostile meeting doesn't solve policy, but it signals a different economy. More concrete, choose language that restores dignity when you could score points. Give credit publicly to a rival whose idea helped. De-escalate in writing. Refuse to circulate the spicy screenshot. Throw a celebration when the project ends and invite the people who made it hard as well as the ones who made it easy. Mercy can be firm. It still testifies we will not play by the rules of contempt. Frame break. If fear is scripting your day, what do you need first? Opened eyes, confused enemies, or a mercy meal? Pray for side act with calm feed where you could flex and watch how raids give way to quiet. Takeaway. Ask God to widen your sight before you widen your voice. Then lead with mercy where humiliation would be easy, because presence changes the count and kindness changes the script. You've watched grocery prices climb like ivy. Paychecks don't stretch. Rent renewals feel like dares. A headline says shortage, therefore the aisle is bare before lunch. Group chats pass links to discounted sacks of rice as if they're treasure maps. Frame break. Can a single word from God change an economy overnight, and what part would you play if it did? Samaria is ringed by enemy tents. 2 Kings 6:24-720 paraphrased. The siege strangles supply, therefore compassion thins into cruelty. Donkey heads sell for absurd sums, scraps fetch a premium, horror stories multiply. The king, shredded by the pleas he cannot solve, blames the prophet he cannot control. This ends today, he swears, but Elisha is sitting with elders, calm as a surgeon naming footsteps at the door before they knock. He speaks an impossible forecast. Tomorrow about this time flour and barley will sell at normal prices at the city gate. A royal officer barks cynicism. Even if God opened windows in heaven, could this be? Elisha replies with a line that chills the room. You'll see it, therefore you won't taste it. Twilight at the gate. 4 men move like shadows, their skin tells their exile. They are lepers, excluded by law, ignored by policy, alive in the kind of body that makes people stare. They do famine math in plain language. Stay here, we die. Go into the city, we die. Walk to the enemy camp, we might die, but we might live. Therefore they risk forward feet, whispering where courage rarely makes noise. They arrive at tents, breathing with no bodies. Pots still steam, robes hang as if owners will return, but no voices call out because fear called louder. God had made the Arameans hear a roar of chariots and horses, the echo of an invented coalition. The army ran flinging gear down the road like breadcrumbs of panic. The lepers eat, then they eat more. Then they carry silver, gold, and clothes to a hiding place. Therefore instinct grabs first, but conscience catches up. This is a day of good news. We are not doing right. If we keep silent, punishment will find us. They pivot from hoarders to heralds and limp back to the gate. Gatekeepers relay the message. The palace wakes with suspicion. Despair trains you to doubt rescue. The king imagines a trap. The enemy is hiding, waiting to pounce when hungry citizens spill out. But a scouting party rides the road to the Jordan and finds a trail of thrown garments and gear, proof of a panicked retreat. Therefore the city surges out like a tide. Tents collapse under joy, markets blossom in an hour, and prices obey prophecy. Abundance arrives so fast the economy skid turns. One more detail sharp as a hinge. The officer who mocked the windows of heaven is stationed to control the flood of bodies at the gate. He sees what he declared impossible. He does not taste it. He is trampled by the very hope he doubted. This isn't pettiness, it's physics of the soul. When cynicism makes you a gate, good news can run you over. Modern mirror. There are days when your industry, your family, your city feels besieged, supply lines choked by scandal, greed, or plain bad luck. Our reflex is gated despair, sarcasm as armor, doom scrolling as liturgy. But the stories hinge as 4 excluded men who refuse to sit and die. They walk toward the problem with nothing but honesty and a maybe. Their steps carry an entire city into a different morning. Hope in Scripture often walks on unlikely feet and arrives through doors marked not for you. What does risking forward look like for you? If you're unemployed, it might be showing up at the small business around the corner with a printed resume and a willingness to mop. If your church feels stuck, it might be starting a tiny pantry rather than waiting for a grant. If your mental health is under siege, it might be texting 2 friends and saying, "Walk with me at dusk. I can't sit in this alone." You can't manufacture miracles, therefore you can take faithful steps where you are. And when you stumble into a tent filled with grace bread, you didn't bake warmth, you didn't earn eat, yes. Then turn and tell a word about gates. Some of us are officers at the gate team, leads, parents, moderators, pastors. Our job is to steward the flow. Cynicism disguises itself as discernment. It feels like strength to scoff. But if God chooses to crack a window of heaven in your watch, will your sarcasm make you a speed bump for mercy? Better test the report, send scouts, then open the gates and get out of the way. Steward the flood so the weak aren't trampled, so prices normalize without exploitation, so early hoarders don't rebrand as heroes. And a word about windows. The officer's line drips with resignation. Even if God opened windows in heaven, he names the right direction and the wrong conclusion. The windows did open. The sound rushed out. Fear fled. Markets flipped. The Bible is relentless on this point. God loves to move about this time, tomorrow, in ways that make accounting departments blush. Therefore, stay small enough to be surprised and brave enough to participate. Frame break. Are you sitting at the gate with a scoff or limping toward the camp with a maybe? Where can you risk forward? Whom should you tell? And if you hold a gate key, how will you open it so hope doesn't trample the very people it came to feed? Takeaway. In famine hours, risk forward with your small maybe, share good news quickly, and refuse to gatekeep what God is pouring out so you don't just see the miracle, you taste it. Picture a hospital corridor at 2 a.m. The chief surgeon signs discharge papers with one hand and wipes his eyes with the other. He saved a life, therefore he must deliver news that will end a season. No more driving, no more late shifts, mercy and judgment in the same sentence. Frame break. When leadership requires hard lines, do your eyes still water? Damascus marble cool under sandals, 2 Kings, Verd 8, 7-15, 9, 13, 14-21, paraphrased. Israel's prophet walks foreign halls because mercy travels. The Aramean king is sick, therefore, Hazael. An ambitious courtman asks Elisha if recovery is possible. Elisha answers with layered truth, the illness itself won't take him, but the throne will change hands. Then Elisha stares until Hazael looks away and the prophet weeps. Why? Because he sees what power without compassion will do. Cities burned, children crushed, mothers torn from tomorrow. Prophets don't enjoy judgment, they grieve it. Hazael returns to his master and the next morning smothers him. The crown moves, the tears weren't theory. Meanwhile, God aims judgment at Israel's rot. A junior prophet sent by Elisha anoints Jehu in a back room. Jehu drives like a storm and does what needed doing, pulls down an evil regime, tramples a queen who weaponized seduction and murder, topples a temple of lies. Therefore, the land breathes for a moment. But Jehu's zeal stops short of full obedience. He keeps the old golden calves because they are politically convenient. He ends idolatry with fireworks and preserves it in policy. Half repentance leaves rot at the roots. Years pass. Elisha, the prophet of small rooms, grows sick with the illness that will take him. King Joash arrives, tears in his voice. My father, and Elisha gives him an acted prayer. Open the window east, shoot an arrow of the Lord's victory, then strike the ground. Joash taps 3 times and stops. Therefore the prophet sighs, the limit of his zeal becomes the limit of his future. If only you'd kept striking. Some victories are lost not for lack of promise but for lack of persistence. Elisha dies. The camera could fade to black. But mercy refuses to clock out. Raiders interrupt a burial. Mourners panic and toss a body into the prophet's tomb. The corpse brushes Elisha's bones and jolts upright, breathing as if surprise itself were oxygen. The text doesn't make a parade of it. It just records a fact that makes theologians blink. Even after his last breath, the residue of a holy life gives life. Legacy isn't a plaque. It's power still serving when your hands are done. Modern mirror. Hazael warns us ambition without tears turns people into projects. Jehu warns us zeal without wholeness replaces idols with prettier idols. Joash warns us timid obedience shrinks tomorrow. Elisha invites us build a life that keeps feeding rooms you'll never sit in. Frame break. When your name is off the emails, what will your bones still be doing? Let's talk legacy math. It's not followers, it's fruit. It's jars in pantries still pouring because you taught people to gather emptiness. It's guest rooms where traveling mercy still rests because you built them before you needed them. It's budgets and bylaws that refuse to monetize grace. It's teams that add flour to poisoned pots because you trained them to repair before they replace. It's arrows shot east because you kept your windows open to God's direction. Therefore, when you are gone, the work of God isn't because you planted practices, not just moments. How do you build that first? Let your convictions cry. If your stance costs people, you should feel it. Authority without tears becomes cruelty. Second, don't stop at dramatic beginnings, finish the repentance. Tear down the public idol and then uninstall the private app. Third, when God hands you arrows, strike until humility tells you to stop. Outlast the awkward. Persistence is not hype, it's worship over time. Finally, entrust the outcomes. You won't see every harvest, you aren't meant to. The point is to live so aligned with mercy that when your story seems over, there is still enough of God's kindness in your wake to raise something someone else thought was dead. That is the profit of small rooms at scale kitchens that became economies, bedrooms that became battlefields, bones that became a final benediction. Sarah's takeaway. Lead with tears, obey without loopholes, and keep striking so the practices you plant today keep giving life long after your name is quiet.